Friends and I had planned a big night of trick-or-treating, but with the snow coming down heavily, most of their parents didn't want them out for long. The storm had been hitting the city for a week, and it felt more like January than October. It was snowing on Halloween, something that almost never happened where we lived. In the end, it was just me, John, and Hayden who were still allowed to go out. We bundled up in heavy snow gear, boots, jackets, hats, to the point where the only parts of our costumes you could actually see were our masks. Then we headed out. For the first couple of hours, there was still a good amount of kids running around, but as the sun got lower, the streets emptied fast. Soon, it was basically just the three of us walking through the snow, going door to door. Eventually, we reached a house on the corner of the block. Nothing unusual about it. The older woman who lived there answered, handed us candy, and wished us a happy Halloween. But when we turned to leave the porch, we noticed a man standing in the driveway. He wore a thick jacket and a mask that was far more disturbing than the cartoonish ones you usually see on Halloween. It looked strangely realistic, with long black hair attached to it that draped over his shoulders. Hayden whispered that he recognized it, the Momo face, which, if you were online a decade ago, you probably know. Creepy was an understatement. The man didn't move. He wasn't walking up or down the driveway. He simply stood there, in the falling snow, staring at us. We walked down the sidewalk, looking back over our shoulders a few times, but the blizzard quickly swallowed him from view. Something about him felt wrong. He was tall, clearly an adult, and completely alone. What was he doing out there? John suggested skipping a few houses, and we all agreed. None of us wanted to run into that guy again. We crossed over to the next street and kept trick-or-treating. But the whiteout conditions made everything feel much more uncomfortable. We couldn't see more than a house or two in either direction, and we had no idea if that man was still out there somewhere in the storm. About 30 minutes passed. Night had fully fallen, and even the street lights were struggling to cut through the snow. That's when John said he needed to head home. His parents had told him to be back by sundown if it was still snowing. Hayden and I walked with him to his house, then stood there deciding what to do next. Honestly, we weren't really thinking about the masked man anymore. He hadn't approached us, hadn't followed us, or so we thought. So it didn't seem worth worrying about. Hayden and I hit a few more houses, but after a while, we were both freezing and pretty much done. He headed home, leaving me to walk to my house alone. It was about a 15-minute walk, probably longer in the snow, and almost instantly, the moment I was alone, it stopped feeling like Halloween at all. Snow covered every inch of the neighborhood. No other kids, no voices, no footsteps. Just me. That's when the paranoia started. I kept glancing around, hoping to spot another trick-or-treater, but instead, I saw something else. Across the street was a forest, dark and silent. As I passed, I noticed a shape standing between the trees. At first, it was just a shadowy figure, mostly hidden by darkness and falling snow. But as I continued walking, I realized he was moving with me, matching my pace. My stomach tightened. I walked faster, heading toward a turn that would take me deeper into the neighborhood where there were more houses and no woods. But the figure followed. He stepped out of the tree line, and when he passed under a street light, I saw it clearly. That same mask, with the long black hair. He must have followed us earlier, but stayed far enough back that we never noticed, and now he was waiting for one of us to be alone. I hurried, practically sprinting through the empty, quiet streets. It felt like I was running through an abandoned town, the snow swallowing every sound except my own footsteps. When I finally reached my house, I slammed the door shut and locked it behind me. I didn't tell my parents anything. I don't even know why. Maybe I didn't want to say it out loud, because saying it made it real. Instead, I went straight to my room and tried to calm down. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang, a sharp, echoing sound in the silence of the house. My heart dropped. I knew I hadn't seen anyone else outside while running home. My parents, confused that any kids were still out that late, went to grab the candy bowl they had already put away. My mum opened the door. I crept into the hallway and peeked toward the front entrance. It was him, the tall man in the mask, standing right there on our porch. And although I couldn't see his eyes behind that mask, I knew he saw me standing at the back of the hallway. He didn't take candy. He didn't speak. He simply turned and walked away. My mum thought it was just some weird adult pulling a Halloween prank. I never told her the truth, that he had followed us through the storm, that he waited until I was alone, that he watched me the entire walk home. And I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't reached my door in time. My name is Jake, and at the time this happened, I was 29 years old. It was the middle of autumn, and I had driven up to a rental cabin where I planned to stay for a few days. It was a small but cozy place, tucked deep in the woods, with a quiet lake just behind it. I had visited the cabin a few times before, so it always felt like a second home, somewhere peaceful to escape everyday life. On my first day, I unpacked, settled in, and spent the late afternoon watching the sun set over the lake. While I was out there, I noticed someone walking along the water's edge, following the perimeter. They weren't doing anything strange, so I brushed it off as nothing more than another person enjoying nature. Once the sun set, darkness swallowed the woods. I headed back inside. There wasn't much to do, so I simply relaxed on the sofa, letting my mind wander until I grew tired. Eventually, I turned off all the lights, double-checked that the doors were locked, and went to bed. I was on the verge of falling asleep when suddenly a voice called out from outside. "Hello? Anyone inside? Hello?" Someone was knocking on the back door. Confused and unnerved, I decided not to answer. After a few minutes, the man walked away. I waited a bit longer, then peeked outside, but couldn't see him anywhere. I had no idea how he was navigating the pitch-black woods. Creeped out, I closed all the curtains and finally went to sleep. The entire next day went smoothly, though I did think about that man a couple of times. With no other information to go off of, the whole situation remained nothing more than an unsettling mystery. That night, I prepared a small campfire outside so I could enjoy the woods with some light. About an hour into sitting there, I heard movement in the trees behind me. I looked but could barely see anything. I tried ignoring it until it happened again. This time, a strange, heavy feeling settled in my chest. Something was off. I quickly smothered the fire and hurried back inside, locking the door. 10 minutes later, someone knocked on the back door again. "Hello? Are you inside?" The same voice from the night before. I stood frozen in the hallway. The man kept knocking and calling out, so I slowly leaned around the corner to peek toward the door. His eyes were staring directly at me. He looked wild, disheveled, frantic, and completely unhinged. "Open the door, please, let me in," he said, his voice trembling with anger and desperation. I ducked back behind the wall. His tone grew more aggressive, like he was pressuring me into opening the door. Heart pounding, I ran to the bedroom and called 911. Disturbingly, the man must have somehow realized what I was doing, because suddenly he started pounding on the bedroom window. The banging grew more violent until the glass cracked. And then, silence. By the time police arrived, a few minutes later, the man was gone. But the cracked window was smeared with blood. The officer said the man must have been punching the glass with his bare hands. I never returned to that cabin again. No one ever identified who the man was or what he wanted. And honestly, I don't want to know. A few years ago, my sister and her boyfriend went camping deep in the woods of Maine. They were both experienced hikers and had gone on several camping trips before, so they felt perfectly comfortable being out in the wilderness for a couple of nights. At first, everything about the trip was perfect. The crisp air, the rustling of leaves, and the peace that comes from being far away from civilization. But that peaceful feeling didn't last. On their first night, they were lying in their tent, talking quietly, when they noticed something moving around their campsite. At first, it sounded like a single set of footsteps circling the tent, but soon there were multiple footsteps, slow, deliberate, and too heavy to be from any small animal. They didn't speak. They just listened. Whatever was walking around them moved in a complete circle, carefully stepping along the edge of the tent. The sound was so close that my sister could feel the faint vibrations under her sleeping bag. Then suddenly, it stopped. Not a single footstep, not a rustle, just complete and unnatural silence. After a few minutes, they convinced themselves that maybe it had just been a deer or another animal passing by. Eventually, they fell asleep. The next morning, as they packed up to leave the campsite, my sister suddenly froze. There on the tent's outer wall, right near where her head had been while she slept, was a large, distinct handprint smeared across the fabric. But what terrified them wasn't just the size of the handprint, it was the fact that it wasn't there when they had gone to sleep. Someone, or something, had placed their hand on the tent while they were inside. They looked at the ground around the campsite, expecting footprints, but the soil was too hard and the leaves too scattered to reveal anything clear. The forest seemed untouched, almost like nothing had been there at all. Without saying a word, they broke down their camp as fast as they could and left. They hiked back to their car in record time and never returned to that forest again. To this day, they still don't know who or what was out there with them that night. But one thing is certain. Something walked around their tent and then touched it. I used to live on the third floor of an old, slightly run-down apartment complex. The building wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't in the best part of town either. Despite that, I felt mostly safe there until the night everything changed. There was a young woman who lived on the second floor directly below me. I didn't know her well, but I'd seen her a few times. She always seemed a bit nervous, like she was trying to keep a low profile. I assumed she was just shy. One night, around 1 a.m., I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, when I heard someone running down the hallway outside my door. Not just walking, running. The footsteps were frantic, pounding hard against the floor. Then they stopped, right outside my apartment. A second later, someone banged on my door. "Please, please open the door," a woman's voice cried out. I froze. I knew that voice. It was the girl from downstairs. She sounded terrified. Before I could even get out of bed, I heard heavy footsteps thundering up the stairwell. Fast, too fast. Whoever was coming up the stairs was chasing her. She banged on my door again. "Please, he's coming. Open the door." My heart dropped. I didn't know what to do. Letting a stranger inside was dangerous, but so was leaving her outside. Before I could make a decision, another voice echoed through the hallway. A deeper voice, angry, sharp. "Where are you?" His footsteps were getting closer. The girl suddenly fell silent. I heard her run down the hallway, past my apartment. The man followed right after, moving quickly, his breathing heavy with rage. I stayed absolutely still, not daring to make a sound. For the next 10 minutes, I heard banging on doors, muffled yelling, and more running. At one point, the man's footsteps returned to my hallway, slower this time, like he was searching, listening. He stopped directly in front of my door. I could see the shadow of his feet through the gap at the bottom. He stood there for a long moment, then walked away. Eventually, everything went quiet. The next morning, I went downstairs to check on the girl. Her door was wide open. The inside of her apartment was trashed, like someone had been looking for something or someone in a frenzy. But she was gone. She never came back for her things. She never checked out with the building management. It was like she completely vanished. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door for her, and what she had been running from. I used to work the night shift at a small gas station off a quiet stretch of highway. It wasn't a busy place. Most nights were slow, and the only people who came in were truckers and the occasional traveler passing through. The job was boring, but I liked the quiet. That changed after one night. It was around 2:30 a.m. when an old pickup truck pulled into the lot. It was beat up, covered in dirt, and rattled like every part of it was about to fall off. The headlights flickered as the engine died. At first, I didn't see anyone get out. Then the driver's door slowly opened. A tall man stepped out. He was wearing a thick hooded coat pulled low over his face. He walked strangely, slow, stiff, like every movement hurt. The moment he stepped into the fluorescent light, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. His coat was soaked, not with water, with something darker. He walked inside without saying a word. The automatic doors slid open, but he didn't look at me or acknowledge me at all. He moved straight to the back of the store, dragging his boots across the floor. Each step left a dark smear behind him. I kept my phone under the counter, ready to call someone if I needed to. He wandered around the aisles for a few minutes, never picking anything up, just walking, watching, listening. Then he came up to the counter. He didn't buy anything. He didn't speak. He just stood there, towering over me. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Sir, can I help you find something?" He slowly lifted his head. The hood slid back just enough for me to see his face, pale, hollow, with dark circles under his eyes. But what disturbed me most was the expression he wore. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was empty, completely empty. Finally, in a low voice, he said, "You should lock your doors." Before I could respond, he walked out of the store, climbed back into his truck, and started the engine. It sputtered to life. Then he drove off into the darkness. I stood there for a moment, confused and shaken. Then I noticed something. The security monitor above me showed the front door camera. The screen flickered, snowy and glitchy, but on it I could see the parking lot. And something was standing where the man had been parked. A second figure, shorter, motionless, staring at the store. I rushed to the door and locked it immediately, then backed away, keeping my eyes on the cameras. The smaller figure didn't move for several minutes, just stood there like a statue in the middle of the lot. Then, without warning, it turned and walked into the woods beside the highway. The next morning, I checked with the police. They said no truck matching that description had been seen on any cameras along the highway. No reports, no sightings, nothing. To this day, I have no idea who that man was, or who was standing in the lot after he left. But every night since then, I lock the doors long before 2:30 a.m.